Okay, this is Dave. My name is Dave Zick, and I'm trying to figure out how to extricate myself from my current circumstances while at the same time contributing to society. Let's see, what's my background? Um, well, math, physics. Let's see, I was kind of a brilliant child, I guess, who didn't really pay attention to things and did things on his own. Then I went to college, and then I had to learn to um, cooperate with the system of education and learn things that were taught to me. And then let's see, I went to graduate school in physics. First, I went to graduate school in math. I did not complete my degree. I was in a PhD program. My best friend, Thornton Guerrero, died, and I became extremely depressed. He was quite young. He was 28 when he died. Then I later did some graduate work in physics. Before that, I was the Washington State Junior Chess Champion. I entered the tournament once and won it. Let's see. After that, I was the University of Washington Chess Champion for 3 years. I got interested in Scrabble and became pretty good at Scrabble, a Scrabble expert. Within 3 tournaments, I got interested in Scrabble because I was playing a chess player who was pretty good at Scrabble. And she introduced me to the game of competitive Scrabble. And then my first tournament, I became a class category 3 player. Well, I won the category 3 event in my first tournament. So, I won $500, I think it was at the time. Then in my second tournament, I became category 2. In my third, I was category 1. I played Dave Wiegand, who was the champion in the United States at the time, and I beat him 2-0, although I got quite lucky, incredibly lucky, to go 2-0 against him in that tournament. Eventually, I became disinterested in Scrabble because mainly it's memorizing the dictionary, and that's kind of boring. It's not as strategically rich as either backgammon or chess. So I played backgammon when I was in college, just as a diversion. When I was a student, I hung out at a place called The Last Exit in Seattle, which is a coffee house that attracted a lot of brilliant people. And there were some really good Scrabble players. I mean, backgammon, well, there were some good Scrabble players there too. Victor Spooples, who's a chess master and many times a Washington State chess champion, played Scrabble, but I played backgammon there and chess. So I was one of the best chess players at The Last Exit. Not originally when I first began haunting the area, but later when I hated losing against the local chess masters. So I actually decided to learn some openings, and I was a good tactician, and I became quite good. So anyway, I was one of the best players there. And let's see. I was 2580 on ICC in the late 80s, I guess. So, right, backgammon. So, backgammon is probably the game that I'm best known for. So I won some tournaments in Seattle, although nothing was rated. There was no ELO rating system at the time, and things were sort of regionalized. Like Bill Roberti was, the big go-to guy he did a lot of incredible research on his own. This is before neural nets. So we learned from Bill Roberti. He did an enormous amount of work to discover the things that he discovered. So And I just played for money, like at the last exit and stuff. And at the time, I was getting paid about $780 a month, I think, by the University of Washington for being a math graduate student and a math TA. They paid for my schooling as well, but I made more playing backgammon than I did from the school. So I got pretty good at backgammon. I read every possible book there was, and I rolled out some positions and studied positions on my own. And then eventually I became sick of it because it was a sort of in a really rough environment in which the sharks took the money from the sheep. And there was one particular shark that I felt sorry for. He was a millionaire, and he had several houses, and he lost all of them due to an addiction to cocaine and backgammon. And I didn't want to partake in that. So that was around 1993 that I quit. With the advent of the neural nets, I called Bill Phipps, who is a friend of mine, I would like to think. Well, at least he was then. And he told me about the neural nets and the style change. And this was about the time where I contracted cancer. So I had bowel cancer for 5 years. And I was undergoing chemotherapy and radiation. This was around 2007. I had a full bowel resectomy around 2012. So I was just playing backgammon against against a neural net program called GNU. And I became fairly good. It considered me world class. And so then when I got well, I just sort of forgot about it, and I did my own thing. I got healthy again. I hiked about 1,000 miles of the Pacific Crest Trail, and the next year, this is in 2014, 2015, I tried the whole thing, but I got plantar fasciitis. I fell in with a group. I was really healthy then. A group of hikers that were hiking about 5 miles a day more than I wanted to hike. So I wanted to hike about 17, 18 miles a day starting out, but I was doing about 23 miles a day, and I was carrying too much weight. So after that, I moved to Fort Collins, and I visited Seattle, and I was when I was coming back, a friend of mine, David Clausa, and there's also Edward Oni, told me about a big backgammon tournament that was being held here. So I entered it, and there are 3 divisions. I entered the open division, the highest level division, because they had the longest number of games per match. And I figured I was kind of arrogant. I figured I was probably better than everybody anyway. And so the best thing to do would be to enter matches that were of the longest length. And little did I know, but most of the best players in the United States actually showed up to this tournament. And I hadn't followed backgammon since 1993, so I had no idea who the best players were. The best player in the world is actually a guy named Mochi. Sorry, Mochi. There's also a guy named Michi from Japan, but they didn't play. But there were, some of the best players in the United States played, and I won. I ended up winning. I played 5 matches, and I won 5 matches. So let's see. I went to Vegas, and I played in a tournament. I didn't win anything, but the competition was really tough, and I did very well. It's tough to win money in a backgammon tournament. And then I became number 1 in the world by ELO, according to backgammon ratings. And that's mainly because I didn't start out as a beginner or an intermediate. I just started out as an advanced player. And I played some more tournaments. Let's see. So I'm still a world-class backgammon player. So I'm pretty good. I would say that I'm at least as good as like probably the top 20% in any open division. So, my PR is in the mid 3 range. While I can play PR of 2s, they generally don't last very long. DMT, I can play PRs of less than one for 30 straight games, but that's kind of rare in between. It depends upon my mood. If I get interested in backgammon, I mean, my interest in backgammon is mainly theoretical rather than as a, an exercise in sports. When I'm really interested in backgammon, I play better. So the thing is, I became homeless after this, and there's a law in Fort Collins which makes it illegal to camp. It's Fort Collins City Ordinance 17181, and it's highly unconstitutional. It's like one of the most unconstitutional laws in the nation. And I got several camping tickets. So my first camping ticket, why did I become homeless? All right, well, I ran out of money and I couldn't find work that I was interested in around here. So I've always placed ideas about ideas higher than, just about anything. Ideas about ideas about ideas are the things that I'm mostly interested in. I've always been kind of like interested in the overall health of everybody, of society, and of the nation and of the world, and fairness and people behaving with respect to treating each other well and kindly and caring about other people, and not running over them. So this law was so unconstitutional that I decided to fight it. And let's see. At first, my first ticket, I got a lawyer, and he lost. So then I got two more tickets, and I represented myself. And the city rolled over rather than defending itself, even though in my motion to dismiss, I incriminated myself, claiming to have camped illegally for 10 days. I had two tickets that were 8 days apart. So I took the 10-day period. The two, one is here, one's here. So I took the 10-day period here and incriminated myself just to make sure that what I was fighting against was the constitutionality of the law. So, I mean, there's no doubt that I was guilty. So I instead of pleading guilty, I pled innocent and then confessed within my motion to dismiss. And the city just rolled over. They did what's called the null prosequi. And the reason that they did this, there's only one possible reason, is that they didn't want it to get judicial review, that I would appeal and get judicial review. The only way to change a law is to get judicial review. And at the time, the city was going through a 20-year program where it was gentrifying itself. And I think that they felt that their ability to control the homeless population was of central importance to drawing, real estate developers. And whether that's true or not, I don't know. But they wanted to be able to control where the hell they went to, give them tickets at random. And they were doing that. They were giving. I slept in my car for 3 years, except for a hotel every once in a while and a shelter for a total of maybe 3-4 months when you add it all up. I hardly ever got a ticket. There were people who were getting tickets on a weekly basis. There were people across the street from me who were getting tickets, like 5 per month. And they wouldn't bother me. And I think that it's because they knew that I would, contest the legality, the constitutionality of this law. So they just left me alone. And also another reason is because I was always asking the cops if they would give me a ticket. Because I felt that it was pretty unfair that they were only giving other homeless people tickets. So that's been of interest to me of late. I'm no longer homeless. I've been living indoors for 1.5 years, and my health has greatly deteriorated. And it's come to the point where I have to actually do something about it. Before I was walking all over, I had torn a labrum of my leg, which is the thing that connects it to the hip. And that limited my walking to about 5 miles per day. Since then, with COVID, I've been pretty careful trying not to get it. Well, the Omicron variant is, it looks like it's not nearly as dangerous as the other variants. It's just way more infective. But, it's time that I take care of my health, and I've been setting my mind to do that. So by getting out, exercising more, and eating better. I lost my food stamps a few months ago, and it's really hard to eat I have disability because I'm a cancer patient. So I was diagnosed with, I forgot to say that, with cancer in 2017, I think. So I'm in my fourth year. And I went into remission after chemo and radiation. And that's one of the reasons I'm not working. But right now, I want to, take care of myself and work. And as far as how I can contribute to society, I thought maybe I could get rid of this law, Fort Collins City Ordinance 17181. But now that I'm not homeless, it's much harder to get a ticket. So 17181 has to do with camping in public places, public property in particular. It actually doesn't define public property. Neither does the zoning laws. There's 26 zones in Fort Collins, but it must be assumed that Fort Collins consists of only public and private property. There's no other logical way to interpret it. And 17182 is the law in which I'm under now. That has to do with camping on private property. So I'm in an apartment, and 17182A would apply to me. 17182A actually, how it defines camping is as in 17181, which is the homeless camping law. So it defines it in the same way. And this is how the city of Fort Collins defines camping. Okay. All right. So this is a little set piece, I suppose, because this is really what I'm interested in. I want to get rid of this law, and I don't know how I'm going to do it except for by civil suit. And in order to sue civilly, I have to have something called standing, which means I have to have been injured. And my rights were violated, so I was injured. And in particular, my First Amendment rights were violated, although the way how is not obvious and requires a bit of explanation, which I'll do in my next tape. But first of all, let me explain how City of Fort Collins defines camping. Camping. The law says, 17181 says, camping shall mean to sleep or to spend the night or to reside or dwell temporarily with or without shelter, or with or without bedding or other camping gear, and with or without shelter, or to perform activities such as eating, or activities of daily living, such as eating or sleeping at such place. And it goes on to say camping shall not include incidental napping or picnicking. So let's look at this. Camping, as defined by Fort Collins, consists of exercising one of four verbs. One, the first clause, we can consider it to be a clause, because these things, although they're not completely independent, you could do a kind of Gram-Schmidt orthogonalization process and actually work this into a logical, decompose the law into an equivalent statement that has four independent clauses which do not interact with each other and stand alone. Such is not useful for human beings to analyze. So, for example, let me explain this. To sleep, okay, this interacts with to perform activities of daily living such as eating or sleeping and also interacts with camping shall not include picnicking, or incidental napping. So incidental napping is a form of sleep. So, okay, let's go. Let me explain this again, or rather recap, and try to maybe compress. So camping shall consist of sleeping, to spend the night, to reside or dwell temporarily, whatever that means, with or without bedding or other camping gear, and with or without shelter. With or without doesn't really add anything logically to it, but it does add elements of what could be probable cause, informing the police as to what could consist of a crime, the crime of camping. So sleep, spend the night, reside or dwell temporarily, that's 3, or to perform activities of daily living, such as eating or sleeping at such place. So it consists of 4 clauses, and each and every one of those clauses attacks human rights. Like, it's vital for people to get enough sleep, right? I mean, this one doesn't absolutely attack the ability to sleep because it says incidental napping is allowable. But if you think about what the hell does incidental napping mean? Incidental napping. Incidental to what? Well, there's sort of it says incidental napping or picnicking are allowable. So it could perhaps, leads one's mind to think that if you eat too much in a picnic and fall asleep, that's okay. So that's the only kind of incidentality that has a word which is included in the law, which one would think could be applicable. The other use of the word, I mean, other types of incidentality, something being incidental, could only mean incidental to will, or to what you mean to do, to intent. What else could it be incidental to, right? So that's what they must mean by incidental in this law. So the legal term for this would be mens rea. So does one have a guilty conscience when one accidentally falls asleep? Incidental could also mean accidental, right? If one accidentally falls asleep. So what the city is actually doing is it's not making picnicking illegal, and it's not making incidental napping illegal, if you think about it. The final clause, which was added to apparently ameliorate the general feelings that this law would give to people who first read it, it just like is a cold splash of water on you when you first read it. It's like, what the hell does this mean? They certainly cannot mean that it's illegal for a homeless person to live, because that seems to be what it means. All right, so the thing about this incidental napping is, if it is incidental to mens rea, then it doesn't have any legal consequence. So it can be ignored. Incidental napping was already legal. By making it illegal, still legal in writ, this is of no consequence. The same with picnicking. So the final clause can be ignored. And the final clause being incidental napping camping shall not include incidental napping or picnicking. So that could be totally struck and just ignored. So then one is left with what's got to be one of the most unconstitutional laws ever made, that it's illegal to camp in Fort Collins. Homeless people can only be on public property or private property. There's a law called 1740 trespassing, which makes it such that homeless people do not have the right to be on public property, such as the right to guest of the people who own, I said public property, I mean private property, such as the right of the people who own that property to guest or to allow homeless people on that property. And even then, if you look at 17182, people who own homes don't have the right to host homeless people for more than 2 weeks per year. This includes churches. Churches don't have the right to host homeless people for more than 2 weeks per year. And the Mennonites, they tried. There's a Mennonite church which helps the homeless, but they got severely harassed by the city. And that's a story in and of itself. There was a lawsuit that took 7 years to resolve, and the state of Colorado jumped down the throat of the city of Fort Collins, and the city of Fort Collins finally dropped the case. But and all of this, I'm sure, has to do with the gentrification program, the 20-year gentrification program that is almost over right now, but I think has a couple of years left, like 3 years, I think. And also in particular, probably has to do with the mayor, Mayor Troxwell, who was mayor at the time. He's a former mechanical engineering professor, but I think he really was into this gentrification program. And all right, so the question is that I'm having is, how can I contribute to society? And the question is whether I should sue the city, because even when I had some problems with the city or with somebody, some local powerful entity, when I decided to represent myself, and I had the city roll over and play nolle prosequi, so it couldn't be appealed. I had some problems in that my internet was totally messing up. And anyway, I won't get into that because it probably will make me sound kind of goofy. But anyway. So the question, we have a different mayor now. We have a more liberal mayor. So perhaps the same thing won't happen if I sue. But that's something to think about. And the question is, how do I even have standing to sue now? Well, what would I sue over? Well, I would sue over 3 years of deprivation of civil rights as a homeless person. But also, I've been homeful for the last year and a half. And so being homeful, I fall under the auspices of 17182B, or A rather. So the thing about 17182A is it has no home interior exclusionary clause. So it's illegal for me to camp within my own home as defined in 17181, the homeless camping law. So it's illegal for me to sleep in my own home, to spend the night in my own home, to reside or dwell temporarily in my own home, or to perform activities of daily living in my own home, such as eating or sleeping. Now, activities of daily living is a well-known healthcare term, and it's also a legal term. It's found in all 50 states. It's found in federal laws, such as OSHA laws. And what activities of daily living is, it can be compressed into something, into dressing, eating, ambulating, toileting, and hygiene. Death, right? DEATH. So, being that it's not defined in 17181, it must include these things, one would assume. And sleeping, by the way, is not included in activities of daily living: death, diet, dressing, eating, toileting, ambulating, or hygiene. So one would assume that by activities of daily living, the C means some broader range of things. By the way, this law is overbroad, and there's a lot of ambiguous things in it. Anyway, but I'm not even going to attack it on that basis. But the question is, how do I have standing now? What kind of damages, can I ask for? Really, what I want is a law change. So I want, let's see, it'd be declarative and injunctive relief. So declarative relief is to have the law claimed to be unconstitutional. Injunctive relief would be to have the a court order for the law to be updated or removed. So my argument for standing is that if the law violates my First Amendment rights, and the reason for this is it's the easiest argument that I could think of. And the argument goes as such, I suppose. Let's see. I had not planned on getting into this in any details. I didn't write any notes out. All this is based on memory. So, let's see. Okay, there's a case that the Supreme Court looked at in 2020, and it's versus New York. It has to do with the Archdiocese. Archdiocese sued New York. And I don't remember what the name of the case is. But therein, the decision was very short. It just that First Amendment rights, if they can never be violated for even minimal periods of time. Or that gives one, well, maybe I should have thought about this before I started talking. There's a certain type of injury. My health isn't so good, so my brain's not working very good right now. All right, so what the hell is that case even? Okay, I guess my brain isn't working very well. I don't know why I can't recall this case. Something burns. Anyway, so let's get to how the hell my First Amendment rights are even violated, because it's not at all obvious from 17181. So it arises from the clause, and I'm not saying that they're violated now, but they were certainly violated during the 3 years that I was a homeless person. So during those 3 years, it was illegal for me to spend the night. It's illegal to, sleep, spend the night, reside well. So it's clause number 2, spend the night. So it's illegal to spend the night on public property in Fort Collins. Now, all the homeless shelters are always full in Fort Collins because the homeless population outnumbers the shelter space allocated by the city by a factor of about 3-to-1 to 10-to-1. And the HUD point of contact figures that are done each year indicates this figure is maybe 2-to-1 or 3-to-1. There's a local expert who thinks that it's closer to 7-to-1. Anyway, so that condition is always satisfied. The homeless shelters are always full, which means that there's always going to be homeless people who can't get into the shelters. And that means they don't have the right to be in the shelter during that particular night. And the only place that they could spend it, if they don't have the money, and generally they don't, to be in a hotel or whatever, is to be on public property. They can't be on private property because that'd be trespassing. Anyway, they don't have the independent right. All that matters is the independent right to be on private property. Homeless people do not have the independent right to be on private property. So they must be on public property. If they're not in a shelter because the shelters are full, they're on public property. So what does that mean? Fort Collins consists of only private property and public property. So that means that almost all the time, fairly regularly, perhaps in a ratio of 3-to-1, homeless in terms of time, homeless people have to be on public property during the night. So they have to spend the night. Yeah, it's illegal to spend the night. So that means that's the second, to sleep, that's the second clause. So camping shall mean to spend the night. So it's illegal to spend the night. So that means it's illegal to be in Fort Collins, right? Because you have to be either on public property or private property. Fort Collins consists only of public property and private property. So that means that it's illegal to be in public property, or in Fort Collins rather. So that means it's illegal to be doing anything, including exercising any of your First Amendment rights, for at least part of the night in Fort Collins. So that means that my First Amendment, it's L. Rod Burns is the case that I was thinking about, which essentially says that even the most brief breach of First Amendment rights consists of irreparable harm. And irreparable harm is the standard that one must meet to sue civilly. So a civil suit, in order to have standing, I must have had irreparable harm. Irreparable means the kind of harm that just can't be paid back directly. There's no, I mean, they didn't take money from me, or whatever. It's something that's a little bit more nebulous than that. So according to L. Rod Burns, especially as expressed in this archdiocese case, which says that even the briefest period of First Amendment right violation consists of irreparable harm, that means I've met the standard of burden during the period of time in which I was homeless to sue civilly for First Amendment rights violations. Now, the First Amendment is the strongest of all possible rights that we have that are guaranteed by the Constitution. And it just works out that way. Congress shall make no law which, it's not even make or enforce, it just make. The 14th Amendment is make or enforce. So there are other rights which are less tightly held. But the easiest way to sue is by finding a First Amendment right violation. And one can include the overbreadth argument there too, because the Supreme Court it frowns on overbreadth outside the First Amendment. Other courts have allowed overbreadth outside the First Amendment. Not that overbreadth is really that important to me, because this law is so unconstitutional that there are so many different arguments that can be raised for its unconstitutionality. And the typical one that's raised for homeless camping is the Martin Boise argument, which is that it's cruel and unusual punishment. That's the Eighth Amendment argument. And that was done by one homeless person in Fort Collins. And the result of that was that the law was declared to be unconstitutional as applied, not on face, but as applied to the circumstances of Adam Weinmold. But the thing is that Adam Weinmold worked for one of the homeless shelters, and so he couldn't stay there. So he was unique in that no other homeless person in Fort Collins works for homeless shelters in general. The rest of the homeless people don't work for homeless shelters. So, so the Weinmold case is almost useless. It will be useful for somebody else because it's advancing the Martin Boise case, but it's almost useless, entirely useless. For my case. So I have a case for the 3 years that I was homeless. And the question is, do I have a case for the year and a half that I've been homeful? And that one is a little bit more difficult, but I think that I do. But I'm not going to go into any of the details. And by suing Fort Collins, if I could get rid of this law, I'd be contributing to society, because this law is being used as an extremely powerful tool to harass homeless people. Even though most of the policemen around here are fairly good, it's kind of so powerful it can't be helped but be abused. by any of them. They can abuse it however they want. They could, yeah. Anyway, so all right, so that's what I'm considering. And the other thing is to try to match my skills with somebody around here who could use them and have them pay for it. That's a problem I've had in Fort Collins since I moved here, because the campus is very agriculturally, educationally based, and also, for animals, like they teach people how to take care of animals, veterinary sciences. And there's nothing equivalent to the instructional center where I worked at the University of Washington for 20 years. There's nothing equivalent to that. So when I worked at the instructional center, I had the advantage of being able to help people for all undergraduate physics classes. During the summer, I occasionally did math as well, all undergraduate math. I worked in the physics education, the physics engineering drop-in center, and we got overflow math problems. I got once or twice, I got graduate level math problems that came from there. And it's also all undergraduate engineering problems, of which I couldn't do advanced engineering because I've never had an engineering class, basically, other than Cobalt, I think, which was considered engineering. That was Fortran in 1981. Anyway, it wasn't Cobalt. Yeah, there's nothing like that. So what I'm good at is like teaching math and physics and engineering, teaching chess, stuff like that. Coming up with new ideas for how ways to do things efficiently, things like that. So I don't know. I did try to match that up here. But in terms of what I can do for society is try to get rid of this law. So, all right, maybe that should be it for my first stream. I guess I'll probably have 10 streams which can explain my legal arguments in more detail. I have a lot of legal arguments that could be used, but I'm not going to use very many. Yeah, anyway, my arguments are original and powerful, I think. And in particular, and like my view of, I approach things as a physicist from first principles. So, working for 20 years in the physics engineering drop-in center, I learned a lot of stuff, and I got interested in there's information theory, which comes from Shannon. And it dates actually to 19. I forget. There's information theory. Shannon information theory is from the 40s. There's von Neumann information theory from basically a few years before that. But information theory feeds into communications theory, which has to do with communication channels, and that has nothing to do with mind-to-mind communication, but just how physical signals are distorted, or at the limitation of like number of bits per second that could be sent down to channel, or noisy channels or something like that. But when you go mind-to-mind communication, then there has to be considerations of number of interpretations. That has to do with the law, with textualism. It also has to do with, there's some sort of French philosopher who thought that he came up with something original, but which had actually been come up with before him. I can't remember his name. Anyway, but has to do with the supposed recursiveness of any language, in that words are defined by other words, and he used the conceptual idea of what the words stand for, the thing, if it exists, Words can certainly stand for things which are not things, but the sign, the thing that you were describing by the words, the words themselves are the sign, but the signed thing, or he called it a trace, he says has to do with other words. I really don't think that that's the way that children learn language. They don't learn it from a dictionary. I don't think that's the way the human mind interprets, not in terms of other words, but in terms of concepts which are ingrained in neural nets, which are set by previous learning. So it's not the word itself or the set of words itself which rings the bell or signals the brain to think about things, the concept. It's not the language. I mean, there's certainly a number of different variants, the set of all possible ways to describe the same thing in different languages, whatever that one could think about, but it's not the language, it's the concept itself. So this has gone a little bit on the sideline, but textualism in the law means how to interpret a law. And if you look at 17181, the mind rebels against what it really means. And it really means that homeless people do not have the right to live. It really. And if you look at 17182B, which has to do with private property camping, it has to do with camping in trailer parks, right, or in RVs for private citizens. And the 17X, this section called camping in the Code of Fort Collins was created in 2006. The previous law had made it illegal to occupy an RV for any reason. So it made it illegal to be in your own RV. And one of the pieces that I did some documents they had that I got earlier before it was occluded by the city. It's hard to get now. You have to request it. But it was on their site, is that one of it wasn't actually on the published legislative intent, it was on a committee meeting before this law was enacted in 2006, was that one of the purposes of 17X is to make it legal to be in one's RV again. And so in order to do that, they made it illegal. What they made camping in 17B, 17182B, they defined camping slightly differently than they did in 17181 or 17182A, which uses the same definition of camping as in 17181, by the way. But the intent of having the same meaning for camping, more or less, should be fairly clear. And the way they define camping in 17182B is that camping is to occupy a motor vehicle for the purposes of living or sleeping. So right there, they define camping as basically living. Living certainly involves sleeping. You can't live for more than 2 or 3 weeks without having slept. The world record used to be 14 days and 3 hours. 2 Chinese guys died after 14 days. There's a medical condition whereby one loses the ability to sleep. However, I think that they must have microsleeps. It's possible to live for almost 6 months with this condition. One goes absolutely nuts when one has it. And there's approximately 30 families in the world who have it. It's genetically inherited. But in general, one must sleep. So therefore, sleep ought to be a fundamental human right. Now, fundamental human right is a due process right. which is the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment. The Fifth Amendment for the feds, the 14th Amendment for the states. So due process rights, it's not. There's a case from Hawaii where a homeless person defended himself pro se and didn't bring up the right arguments. Otherwise, sleeping might be considered a fundamental human right now, in which case the city needs a compelling interest and also narrowly tailored legislation in order to overcome the burden of having inflicted or having raped our fundamental rights. That's what due process just Scottus has evolved this sort of procedure. So I mean, this sort of requirement rather. Okay, but I think that sleep actually. I have an article that says that the integrity of white and I think it was white brain cell matter depreciates very quickly with lack of sleep. Anyway, so sleep is basically it should fall under bodily integrity. So if you can't sleep, the integrity of your body is can't be maintained. So sleep ought to be a fundamental human right. So I mean, there's that. Why did I get onto that? So that's one. To sleep is a fundamental human right. Spend the night, basically, as previously noted, that violates all of my First Amendment rights. It pretty much violates every right. They can't do that. That's called banishing somebody temporary banishment. For a homeless person, that means leaving the city. You're not allowed to spend the night on public property. And you're not allowed to spend the night on private property because you don't have that right of your own. Right? It's the right that matters. It's not the fact that you might know somebody who might occasionally allow you to spend the night on private property. That would be their right, not yours. And even if you could find such a person, they could only do it for 2 weeks, according to the law. They're limited. Okay. So, all right. So I'm sort of rambling. A textualist interpretation of this law has to be the only one, because there are way too many interpretations that are possible. Because everything is pretty vague. Like, what does to reside or dwell temporarily mean? Does it mean to linger? Does it mean to loiter? What are activities of daily living? Certainly, they don't mean ambulating because, well, we all have the right to ambulate, right? That's very clear. I mean, the right to intrastate, not interstate, but intrastate travel is a fundamental human right in Colorado as well as Wyoming and probably most other states. Interstate travel is a fundamental human right, but intrastate travel should be as well. Otherwise, it makes no sense. It doesn't mesh well with interstate travel. But in People for JM versus some city here in the year something like 1986, the Supreme Court of Colorado ruled intrastate travel is a fundamental human right. So, I mean, we have the right to ambulate. They can't deprive us of that right. So certainly that interpretation of what activities of daily living are, which is death, dressing, eating, ambulating, toileting, hygiene, certainly they can't mean that. They can't mean toileting either, could they? Hygiene. Hygiene is important for bodily maintenance, right? So it's bodily integrity situation. So almost every clause is denying a homeless person the right to exercise a fundamental right that they have nowhere else to exercise in Fort Collins when the homeless shelters are full. And anyway, so camping. So the textualist interpretation is certainly gives us the most straightforward interpretation. All that matters for a homeless person to succeed in municipal court here is the judicial interpretation. What the judge thinks at the time. There are three judges. They may not agree on what camping means. They may not have the same interpretation of camping over time. Their interpretation of what camping means, might depend upon the person who allegedly commit the crime of camping. It might depend upon whether the judge likes this person subconsciously or doesn't like the person subconsciously. It could depend upon a lot of things. And here we're talking about the judge. The police have no idea what the camping law actually says. They have their little notes. They have no clue. I've talked to a bunch of them. But let's take a look at what camping is defined to be in Fort Collins again. If you look up the definition of camping in any dictionary, what it will say is that camping is to occupy a camp. And a camp is fixed relative to the ground. Now, if you look at the definition of camping in Fort Collins, it says camping shall mean it's to exercise one of four verbs, one of the four clauses. It's to sleep, to spend the night, to reside or dwell temporarily, or to perform activities of daily living. So camping is to exercise a verb. Where? At such place. At such place. What is such place? Well, in 181, it's public property. Now, you could be on the move when you're exercising a verb. They don't allow people to sleep in buses in Fort Collins. Why? Well, it could ostensibly be because they're camping, because they're sleeping in a bus. Eating in a bus could be camping, right? To perform the activities of daily living, such as eating or sleeping. So you shouldn't be allowed to eat in a car while driving in Fort Collins because it's exercising one of the four verbs. It would be to camp. All right. So that's the difference between camping, colloquially speaking, as defined in the dictionary, which is to occupy camp, which is fixed relative to the ground, or camping in Fort Collins, which is just to exercise the verb. At such place, which is exercise the verb on public property. And so they're completely different. And so camping as defined by Fort Collins is actually a technical term in terms of plain language law, in terms of construction. So that would be something for the judge to consider. But the judge would have to consider it, what does this law mean constructively? It doesn't resemble colloquial camping at all. Anyway. And what if one were to define what a camp is not defined in the Code of Fort Collins. One could work backwards and say that camp can be defined by camping. And how would one do that? Well, the logical thing to do would be to say a camp is a place where camping is done. if one does that, then we could find that all camping is done at such place, both in 17182 and in 17181. And what is such place? Such place in 17181 is public property. So there is only one camp in Fort Collins on public property, and it is public property. There are not a bunch of camps in Fort Collins on public property. There can only be one, which means that one could be moving about one's camp, any way which one wants to, exercising the verbs necessary to satisfy the requirement of what camping has been defined to be by the city of Fort Collins. And so it's completely different than camping is defined by any dictionary. And so it's a technical term. My first case with Fort Collins, when I was homeless, the prosecutor tried to confuse camping and camping, tried to trick me. And now she's the chief judge. And she's also the one that was handling the Wymold case. But I mean, that attempt certainly is valid. And it probably would work with a lot of people, but it just is pretty laughable the way it was tried with me. But she had limited time to do, and their position is untenable. And so, being that their position is indefensible, they just try not to have it defended. They try not to get to have it exposed to the light of judicial review, and to keep it stuck in municipal court for whatever purposes they originally had for it, which had to do with gentrification and the control of the homeless people because they thought they were an eyesore. This is my take on it. All right, well, let me end the stream. It's been an hour. So what can I do for society which is useful? One thing is to try to fight this law and to sue civilly. But the thing is, I'm not a lawyer, so I'd like to get a lawyer to help me on this. I have all the arguments already made. I've done the legal research, but I'm not a lawyer. Ideally, it would be I guess it would be a 42 1982. Was that the right? Is it 42? It'd be a 1983? It'd be a federal lawsuit because my federal rights have been violated. But I could sue in the city and have it a state lawsuit because, well, my state rights have been violated. Federal rights and state rights are very similar. We have in the Constitution of Fort Collins, we have almost all the same rights that are included in the Constitution of the United States. All right, so that's what I'm thinking about, what I could do to be useful to society today. Have a good night. It's a new year. It's 3:42 a.m. right here on the 1st of January, 2022. Bye.